Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. This area's for the official party only. If you're a guest, visitor seating's down the pier. Let me get someone to walk you down." The voice came across the cold concrete before the morning had finished arriving. 0640. The harbor still wore its night color, a flat pewter gray, and the wind came off the water in long, even pulls that smelled of diesel and salt and wet rope. 270 feet of cutter sat against the pier with her lines doubled and her brow rigged, and along the apron someone had begun setting folding chairs in rows under a half-raised awning that snapped and shivered in the gusts. The woman he was speaking to wore civilian travel clothes, a dark coat, flat shoes made for walking, not for standing in, a small bag over one shoulder. She had come up the pier alone, out of the half-light, the way people come who have somewhere to be and no need to announce it. "Understood," she said. One word. She stepped back. Not 3 steps, not a flustered shuffle, exactly to the painted line at the edge of the roped area, and no farther, and stopped there with her weight settled evenly over both feet, like someone who had spent years on decks that moved. Lieutenant Garrett Pace did not notice any of that. He was 28 years old, and he had a clipboard with a seating chart color-coded by precedence, and he had been awake since 0400, and he had measured this morning down to the minute because the morning was his. He noticed that she had complied, which was all he needed. He turned back to his chart and the half-rigged awning and the congressman's aide who had not yet arrived. He never once looked at her hands. She had counted the lines before he finished his sentence. 6. 2 bow, 2 stern, 2 spring, doubled for the ceremony. And one of them, the aft spring, leading too far forward, taking a strain it was not meant to take as the tide pressed the hull against the camel. One of them was wrong. She read the rest of it the way other people read a room. The set of the brow, the angle of its rails, the way it canted a half-degree when a chief walked across it. The camel riding badly between hull and pier. The chop standing up in the basin as the wind backed toward the southeast. She read the cutter the way she had once read black water at 1,300 meters, and she filed every piece of it without a flicker on her face. 2 decks above her, on the quarterdeck, a man watched the whole exchange. Master Chief Boatswain's mate. Gideon Mauck had 27 years in the Coast Guard, and most of them on the water, and he had learned to watch people the way a good bosun watches a sky. He saw the lieutenant wave her off. He saw the woman step back to the line and no farther. He saw her weight settle. He saw her eyes go, not to the chairs, not to Pace, not to the bunting, but to the lines, and then to the brow, and then to the harbor mouth, in that order, the way you check a ship before you ever look at a person. "Huh," Mauck said to no one. The seaman beside him followed his gaze, and saw only a civilian standing politely at a rope. "Master Chief." "Nothing," Mauck said, but he kept watching until she walked the length of the pier once, slowly, reading every chalk and every fair lead as she went, and then turned and left the way she had come, out into the gray. She had what she came for. A ship will tell you the truth about itself in the first 90 seconds, before it knows you are listening. The truth about how it is run, and watched, and cared for, written in the set of its lines, and the angle of its brow, and whether anyone moved to sandbag a frame, walking off its plate in a rising wind. She had asked for those 90 seconds the way she asked for very little, and Ostrander, who understood, had given them to her. Everything she needed to know about the cutter Meridian and the people who kept her. She had read off the cold concrete in the time it took a busy lieutenant to wave a stranger back to a line. And the one man who would stand at the podium beside her in 3 days had already decided she did not belong anywhere near it. The cutter's name was Meridian. She was a famous class medium endurance cutter, 270 feet, white hull and buff stack, the kind of ship that spent her life a long way from any pier, counter-drug patrols in the deep Caribbean, migrant interdiction, search and rescue in seas that would swallow smaller boats whole. In 3 days, she would change command. The captain who had her now would read his orders and walk down the brow for the last time, and a new captain would read different orders and walk up it, and the ship would go on as ships do, indifferent to the names of the people who command her. The woman in the dark coat already knew all of that. She had known it before she ever saw the pier. She had read the ship's history on the flight in, the way she read everything, and she had come early and alone and quiet, because she had learned a long time ago that a ship will tell you the truth about itself in the first 90 seconds if you let it, and that it stops telling you the truth the moment everyone knows who you are. So for 3 more days, she would let them not know. The formal relief began the next morning, and Commander Marisol Quintero spent it the way she spent most things, paying attention. She was aboard in working clothes by 0700, in the wardroom with the outgoing commanding officer, Commander Liam Ostrander, going line by line through the turnover, the equipment casualties, the personnel records, the fuel state, the open discrepancies that every ship carries like old scars. Ostrander was 45, gray at the temples, tired in the way men get tired at the end of a command they have loved. He knew exactly who she was. He had requested her by name, and he had agreed, at her quiet asking, to let the morning of the change of command run unmanaged so that she could see the ship and the crew as they actually were, and not as they performed for a flag. It was Ostrander's wardroom for 3 more days. He honored her request and said nothing. Lieutenant Pace came in at mid-morning to brief the ceremony timeline. He had 3 of these under his belt, and he ran them well, and he talked through the sequence with the brisk confidence of a man who has done a thing correctly before. He addressed it all to Ostrander. The woman at the end of the table he registered as a consultant, or a family member, or some part of the protocol apparatus that produced people like her at events like this. Arrival of the official party at 0950, Pace said. Presiding officer at 1000. Invocation. Remarks by the presiding officer. Then we read the orders. Then the relieving remarks. Then, orders are read after the remarks, Quintero said, not before, and the long glass passes on the words, I relieve you, not before them. Pace looked at her for the first time as a person who had said something. I appreciate the input. I've run 3 of these. You have, she said, and she let it go. She did not pull the rank she was on paper, still 3 days from holding. She had no use for it yet. She finished her coffee and went to walk the main deck. The aft spring line was still wrong. The tide was making, the hull pressing harder against the Camel by the hour, and the spring was taking a strain across the chalk that would, by early afternoon, start to chafe in earnest. She found the boatswain's mate of the watch at the quarterdeck. Ease your aft spring a fathom before the tide turns, she said. 13:10 today, or you'll part it at the chalk, and you'll do it in front of 200 guests on Saturday. The boatswain's mate, a second class with sunlines around his eyes, looked at her, looked at the spring, and went and checked the tide table, because that is what you do when a stranger tells you something specific. High water slack at 13:10. She was right to the minute. He eased the spring a fathom. Word moves on a ship the way water moves. It finds every space. By noon, there was a thing the deck force half knew, that there was a woman aboard who read a spring line like a bosun and quoted the ceremony program like a flag aide, and nobody could say which she was. Malk found her at the rail at the end of the forenoon watch. He did not ask her name. He had decided not to, the way you decide not to spook a thing you want to watch. "Where'd you learn to ease a spring on a falling tide?" he asked. "On smaller boats," she said. "Smaller boats where?" She looked out at the harbor mouth, at a little fishing skiff working across the basin, and something in her face went still, and then came back. "Hot ones," she said. Malk heard the whole career in the two words. He nodded slowly and did not push, and went below thinking about it. The turnover went on through the afternoon, and Ostrander walked her through the parts of the ship a chart never shows. The engineering plant with its one cranky No. 2 diesel that ran fine if you babied the fuel rack on a cold start. The small arms locker. The medical spaces. The mess deck, with its framed photographs and its plates, and the small brass things bolted to the bulkhead that a ship accumulates, the way a person accumulates years. Quintero asked few questions, and the questions she asked were the right ones, the ones that told Ostrander she had commanded before and lost a ship's worth of sleep over the same fears he had. Fuel state in a building C, the watch bill, the one young sailor on every crew who is one bad night away from a mistake. She wrote almost nothing down. She did not need to. She had the kind of memory that comes to people who have learned that the detail you fail to hold can be the detail that kills. And she held all of it, and she gave none of it back to Pace, who came and went through the wardroom twice more that day, and never once thought to ask the quiet woman at the end of the table a single thing. Lieutenant Pace, meanwhile, was solving a seating problem. A congressman's aide had been added to the official party, and space inside the ropes was finite, and so Pace moved a name off the rehearsal seating to make room. The name he moved was the unbadged woman who kept turning up. TBD, he wrote beside it. Guest, verify. He did it without malice. He did it the way you tidy a desk. She had shown the deck force she was a mariner. She had shown the wardroom she knew the ceremony cold. And the only man on the pier who still could not see it was the one writing her out of the chairs. By the afternoon, the not seeing had hardened into something with edges. The rehearsal ran on the pier at 1500, and Pace ran it, and he got the colors details timing wrong, called the dip a beat early, so the ensign came down out of step with the bell. Quintero, standing where he had placed her at the back of the formation, leaned a few inches toward the young seaman beside her and said the correct count under her breath, low, just for him. Wait for the second bell. Down on 3. The seaman fixed it on the next pass. Pace assumed he had caught it himself and was pleased. Then Pace came to her, kindly but firmly, and asked her to wait in the hospitality tent. "We're tight on space inside the ropes today, ma'am. There's coffee in the tent. I'll send someone when we're set." She went. She did not argue. From the open side of the tent, she watched the awning that sheltered the guest chairs, the way its windward frame was racking in the gusts, the No. 2 leg walking a quarter inch at a time against its base plate as the wind worked it. She found a petty officer who had a moment. "Your No. 2 awning leg is walking," she said. "Windward side. When the wind backs this evening, it'll come down on the chairs. Sandbag the base now, while it's easy." The petty officer wrote it on the back of his hand, and meant to do it, and got pulled to 3 other things, and did not do it. The young seaman from the rehearsal drifted over to the tent, embarrassed on her behalf in the way decent young people are. Her name tape, when she finally got one, would read Halverson, and she was 19 and 4 months out of basic, and she could not work out why the brisk lieutenant kept moving this calm woman around like furniture. "Are you with the protocol company, ma'am?" Halverson asked. "No," Quintero said. "I'm just here for the ship." It was the truest thing anyone said all day, and the girl had no idea. Ostrander passed by the tent on his way aft, caught Quintero's eye, and gave her a small nod. The nod of a man who knows exactly who you are and is letting you do the thing you asked to do. The audience saw the nod. Pace, 3 feet away with his checklist, did not. Evening came, and the wind began to back, exactly as she had said it would, and Pace ticked the last box on his rehearsal sheet and went home, satisfied that the morning was under control. The number 2 awning leg kept walking in the dark, a quarter inch at a time, and no one had sandbagged it. If you have ever been waved out of a room, you were 3 days from running. If you have ever stood at the line they pointed you to and watched people get something wrong that you could have fixed with one sentence and said nothing and waited, then you already know the particular patience this story is about. Stay with it. Subscribe to Honor Tales and let the patient ones show you how it's done. On the second day, the exclusion stopped being social and became official. It started on the quarterdeck at 0800. A young security petty officer, prompted by a note in Pace's neat hand about an unescorted civilian observed inside the official party, came to Quintero and asked, politely, for her credentials. He was doing his job. He was right to do it. She had already, without thinking about it, clocked every approach to the quarterdeck, the brow, the after gangway, the gap by the trash float, the way she clocked exits and angles everywhere, all the time, because once it had mattered very much, and the habit had never left. She reached into her coat and showed him her identification. He read it. He read it again. His eyes went to the rank, and then to her face, and the color left him. "Ma'am, Commander, you did right to check," she said quietly before he could spiral. "Log it. Carry on. Don't make it a thing, and don't let it ruin your morning. You did your job exactly the way you're supposed to." He carried on. She had protected him from his own near miss, and he would remember it. Pace, who did not know that security had already folded, escalated on paper. He removed the TBD guest from the seating manifest entirely and wrote, in the margin, "Verify identity before admitting to official party." He believed completely that he was protecting the ceremony. That was the thing about Pace. He was not a villain. He was a man who had mistaken the map for the deck and who would defend the map to the last because the map was the part he could control. Below, Malk pulled Ostrander aside in the passageway outside the cabin. "Sir, you know who that woman is." "I do, Master Chief." "Then you know your project officer's about to write his own incoming captain off the guest list." Ostrander almost smiled. "She asked to see it raw. She wants the morning unmanaged. Let the man hang his own bunting." Malk's jaw worked. "Aye, sir. I'll let it run." He looked out a porthole at the gray water. "I just don't much like watching a good ship not see its own captain." "Neither do I," Ostrander said. "But it's hers now, not mine. 3 more days it was mine to fix. After Saturday, it's hers to teach." On deck, Quintero walked the pier at the tide change and read the harbor. The wind had backed to the southeast as she'd said it would. The awning's number 2 leg was visibly bent now, a slow steel lean over the second row of chairs. And out past the basin mouth, riding the chop, a small craft loitered. Just sitting, engine idling, going nowhere, the way small craft do for 100 innocent reasons. She watched it the way she had once watched a skiff that would not turn away. Her pulse did not change. Her face did not change. But she stood at the rail a few seconds longer than a tourist would have, and she did not look away from the water until the little boat finally turned and ran back toward the marina. And only then did she let the memory she had been holding at arm's length all week brush the edge of her mind. A bow wave in the dark, a count of seconds, a decision that could not be unmade, before she folded it away again. It was the loitering that did it. Not the boat, the loitering. A boat going somewhere is just a boat. A boat sitting still off a basin mouth with its engine turning is a question, and she had learned to answer questions like that with the part of her that did not sleep. She watched its bow, the way it held its angle to the wind, whether anyone aboard was looking at the cutter or at the water, or at nothing. Probably a man waiting on the tide. Probably someone's brother-in-law killing an hour before the marina opened. Probably nothing, which is what almost everything is, almost all of the time. But almost is the word that costs you, and she had paid the price of almost once, in full, and she would stand at a rail 1 second longer than a tourist for the rest of her life because of it. The little boat finally turned and ran back toward the marina, and she let her shoulders come down a 1/4 inch that no one would have seen. Not yet. Not here. Saturday first, on the morning she was to take command, the ship's own paperwork listed her as a guest to be verified, and she spent the day watching the water like a woman who had seen, once, exactly what the water can send. Late on the second day, Mock decided he could not stay entirely silent, and he tested her one last time. He came to the brow as the early guests were being walked aboard for a small pre-ceremony reception, and he stood beside her at the rail and watched the water with her for a while. Two people who both understood that the harbor was the most interesting thing on the pier. "You're not protocol," he said at last. "No," she said. He nodded. He didn't ask the rest. "All right." He looked at her sideways. "Whatever you're doing, commander or whatever you are, when it lands, I'll be 3 feet behind you." "I know you will, Master Chief," she said. "You have been since Thursday." That was when the wind made its decision. It backed hard, a long, heavy gust off the southeast, and the number 2 awning leg, bent, unsandbagged, walked off its base plate over 2 days of patient wind, let go. The windward frame dropped a corner, the canvas bellied and snapped, and the whole leading edge of the awning came swinging down toward the brow and the second row of chairs where the early guests stood. Diane Petro was on the brow. She was 71 years old, the widow of a chief who had served in this very cutter a generation ago, and she had come to see the old ship honored one more time. The brow canted under the sudden shift of weight and noise, and she stumbled. Quintero was already moving. She had read the leg on Thursday, predicted the failure on Friday, and some part of her had been waiting for it. So that when it came, she was not surprised by it. She was early to it. She caught Petrow's arm with one hand, set her own back hard against the brow rail to take the cant out of it, and with the other hand pulled Halverson, who had frozen at her colors post, clear of the swinging frame. 3 points of contact, no wasted motion. The economy of a person who has moved heavy, frightened weight across a deck in a seaway, and knows that panic is the thing that kills. "I've got you," she said to Petrow, low and even. "Step where I step. You're fine. We're going to walk off this brow together. Slow." The reception scattered and reformed the way a flock does. A bosun got the canvas under control. No one was hurt. Diane Petrow, white and shaking, held tight to Quintero's hand all the way down to the solid concrete of the pier. And when she could speak, she thanked in her confusion. The dock worker. "Bless you, you sweet girl." Quintero let her believe it. It cost nothing, and it gave the old woman something to hold on to. Halverson stared at her, like she had seen something she didn't have a word for yet. And Pice arrived after the fact. He saw what a man sees when he arrives at the end of a thing. A civilian in the middle of a safety incident at his ceremony. Guests scattered, his careful mourning briefly out of its lane. He was mortified, and he was annoyed, and the two feelings braided together into exactly the wrong response. "With respect, ma'am," he said, stiff and quiet so the guests wouldn't hear. "Every time there's a knot in my mourning, you're standing in the middle of it. Tomorrow, please, just find a seat and stay in it." He had now, twice, mistaken the only fully competent person on the pier for the source of his problems. Mauk, 3 feet behind her exactly as promised, said nothing at all. He just looked at Lieutenant Pace for a long, level beat, The kind of look senior enlisted men have been giving junior officers since there were ships. And then he looked away and let the morning keep its secret one more night. She had just kept 2 people off the deck with her own back against the rail, and the man running the ceremony had asked her one more time to sit down and stay out of the way. If you're still here, if you want to know what it costs to be this calm, where a person learns to be early to disaster instead of surprised by it, that's the next part. And it's the part she never tells anyone. Subscribe so you don't miss it. She earned all of it on a night she does not talk about, in water that was the temperature of blood and the color of nothing at all. The night before the change of command, alone in a guest room ashore, Commander Marisol Quintero laid out her service dress blue for the morning. She set the ribbons in their order, and she took from her bag a small, flat box she carried to every command and opened almost never. And inside it lay a bronze star with a small bronze letter Wi-Fi, and she looked at it for a while in the lamplight, and then turned it face down in the box, the way she always did, because she had never been able to look at the front of it for long. She was 29 the year she earned it. It was 2011, and she was a lieutenant, and she had command of a 110-foot patrol boat on a patrol force's Southwest Asia deployment in the northern Arabian Gulf, guarding an offshore oil terminal that pumped a measurable fraction of a nation's blood out into the world every single day. Her brief was simple and terrible. The water around the terminal was a defended zone. Anything on it that would not turn away from the platform was, after a point measured in meters, a threat. She had 30 seconds and 400 meters and a crew of 7. And the skiff did not turn. It came out of the dark on the seaward side, low and fast, a bow wave standing white in the night vision green. And then there were 2 of them, then a third hanging back, and they ran straight at the terminal the way a thing runs when it has already decided to die. Quintero conned her boat off the platform and put it between the skiffs and the steel, which is the whole job, which is the only job. You put yourself in the way. She called the engagement on the radio in a voice she would not recognize on a recording. Her gunners broke the first skiff and turned the second. The wakes hit. The boat slammed and shuddered. The night came apart into noise and spray and the specific smell of it. And her crew held, because she held, because that is how it works. She pulled Seaman Reuben Coyle out of the water by the collar of his float coat. He was 20 years old and bleeding and alive, and she got him aboard with 2 hands and the help of a boatswain's mate. And Coyle lived and is alive today and has children. Petty Officer 2nd Class Dexter Otero went into the water in the dark. He was 23. He was the best deck seaman she ever had, the kind of sailor who made a boat run better just by being aboard it. And a concussion of water and the violence of the maneuver and the simple black indifference of the sea took him over the side, and she turned the boat. She turned it twice. She put the searchlight on the water, and she ran the search pattern she could run in her sleep, the pattern she still runs in her sleep. And the Gulf gave her back a float coat and a flashlight still feebly burning, and did not give her back Dexter Otero. She ran the pattern until there was no more fuel to run it with. Expanding square, then a creeping line search along the set of the current, the searchlight cutting a white cone across water that gave nothing back. She knew the drift rate of a body in that temperature and that current to within a margin she could recite, and she worked the math out loud on the bridge so her crew would have something to hold on to besides the dark, and the math said he should be inside the cone, and the cone stayed empty. A boat will tell you the truth if you let it, and so will the sea. And the truth the sea told her, that night was the one truth she has never been able to forgive it for. She brought her crew home with 1 empty rack and a wounded man who lived, and that is the arithmetic of command that no school can teach and no medal can balance. They pinned the star on her 6 weeks later, in a hangar that was 110 degrees, with a citation a captain read aloud into the heat. She stood at attention and heard exactly one name in the whole citation, and it was not hers. It was the name they read at the end, the name of the crewman lost, and she has never in 15 years read the front of that citation out loud, and she never will. That was where she learned to read water, not in a school. On a night when looking away for 1 second was the difference, and she had not looked away, and it had cost her everything anyway, and the lesson had burned itself so deep that she had been reading the harbor all week the way she read the Gulf that night. The loitering skiff, the backing wind, the leg walking off its plate. Because some part of her would never again be willing to be surprised by the water, or by a brow, or by a frame coming down on a row of chairs full of people who trusted somebody to be watching. In the lamplight, she closed the box and turned it face down and switched off the light. The woman Lieutenant Pace kept asking to sit down had already paid, in full and in advance, for the right to stand at that podium. She just hadn't told him the price. Saturday came clear and bright. The wind dropped to a clean 10 knots, and the pier was transformed. The cutter was dressed, signal flags running bow to stern. The chairs stood in straight white rows, the awning re-rigged, and this time sandbagged. Side boys in their dress blues, the band tuning quietly, a photographer. 200 guests filing in under a blue sky that the channel's audience would have called, if they were here, exactly the right kind of blue. The official party seating sat roped off near the podium, and the program, printed, folded, correct in its sequence at last, waited on every chair. Commander Marisol Quintero arrived at 0940 in service dress blue, ribbons in their order. The bronze star among them turned, for once, to face the world. She came up the pier the way she had come up it on Thursday, unhurried, reading the deck and the water out of habit even now. And Lieutenant Pace, heads down over his timeline with the sector commander's arrival 9 minutes out, saw the woman from the pier somehow inside the ropes again. He did not read the uniform. This is the thing that happens to a man who has spent 3 days certain of a story. He sees the story, not the person. He saw the civilian who kept turning up where she didn't belong, the knot in every one of his mornings, and his certainty closed over the truth like water over a stone. He signaled 2 members of base security. "That's the one I flagged," he said, low and fast. "She's not on the manifest. Walk her to guest seating, now, before the presiding officer's party steps off. Go." A security petty officer stepped to Quintero, and up close, at arm's length, he saw the rank on her shoulder boards, and the ribbons on her chest, and the bronze vipo, and he understood, in one cold drop of the stomach, what was happening, and he froze. Quintero took the moment off him. She did not let him stand there, caught between a lieutenant's order and a commander's shoulder boards. She turned, calm as still water, and stepped toward the rope herself, walking with him, taking the scene out of it. "Walk with me," she said quietly, just for him. "It's all right. You're following orders. That's your job. Walk slow, and don't worry about any of this. None of it's yours to carry." And at the rope, at the very back of her own ceremony, she turned and looked at Lieutenant Pace. And she smiled. It was a small smile. It was not cruel, and it was not triumphant. It was the smile of someone who has decided, completely, to let the morning arrive entirely on its own, to take her own hand off the wheel and let the truth come up the pier under its own power. Because some lessons cannot be told, they can only be allowed to happen. She smiled at him then, the first time all week. He would spend a long time understanding that smile. Over the loudspeaker, smooth and warm, the master of ceremonies. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the presiding officer. The band lifted. Captain Roland Esquivel's party stepped onto the pier in a glitter of gold and white. And Pos, certain the last loose knot in his mourning was finally tied, turned his eyes to his program. He had just had his own incoming captain walk to the back of the crowd by armed security, and up at the podium, the band was already playing the march that would call her forward by name. Captain Esquivel reached the podium, set his cover on the shelf beneath it, and let his eyes move across the official party the way a presiding officer does, taking the measure of the morning. He was 51, the sector commander, and he had signed the orders that sent Marisol Quintero to this ship, and he knew her record the way you know the record of someone you have personally bet on. He did not find her in the incoming commanding officer's seat. The seat was empty. His eyes went to Master Chief Mock, standing at the head of the crew formation, and Mock, who had promised to be 3 feet behind her when it landed, and who had spent 3 days hating that he'd had to keep that promise at a distance. Mock let his gaze travel, slowly and deliberately, all the way to the back of the crowd, to the rope, to the woman in service dress blue, standing at the very edge of her own ceremony with 2 security guards beside her. Esquivel's face changed. He leaned to the microphone, and his voice went out across 200 people and a dressed ship and a clean blue sky. "Before we begin," he said, "I believe our incoming commanding officer has been kept waiting at the back of her own ceremony." A pause that landed like a dropped anchor. "Commander Quintero, will you come forward, please?" The pier turned. 200 heads, the crew formation, the side boys, the band. Every face came around toward the rope at the back, and Marisol Quintero stepped off the rope and began to walk. She walked up the center line of the pier toward the podium, unhurried, the mariner's walk, her eyes still reading the deck and the water out of 15 years of habit even now, even here. She did not hurry, and she did not dawdle. She walked the way a captain walks onto a ship that is about to be hers. Halverson, at her colors post, came to attention so sharp it nearly lifted her off the deck, and her eyes were shining. Diane Petrow, in the second row, pressed a hand to her mouth as the whole of it arrived in her at once. That the calm dock worker who had walked her down the brow, step where I step, was the woman they were all standing up for. And Lieutenant Garrett Pace watched her walk toward the podium, and his face went through it in order, the way a face does when the floor of a man's certainty gives way beneath him. Confusion first. Why is the civilian walking to the podium? What is this? There's been a mistake. Then disbelief. No, the seat. The manifest, she's not. No. Then recognition. And the recognition was the worst of it, because it all came at once. The corrected sequence in the wardroom, orders after the remarks. The eased spring line on the falling tide. The awning leg, walking. She told the petty officer to sandbag it, her own back against the brow rail with the old woman's hand in hers. Every single knot in his careful mourning had been the same pair of hands, working quietly to keep his ship and his guests safe, while he moved those hands to the back of the crowd. He replayed 3 days and 4 seconds. The spring line, the awning leg, the widow on the brow, the smile. Every knot in his mourning had been the same person trying to keep his ship safe, and he had ended it by having her walked off her own pier by security. Then horror. Pure and total and silent. The ceremony went by the book, because the book is what holds a thing together when a man's world is ending in the third row. Commander Ostrander stepped to the podium and read his orders of detachment. Then Commander Marisol Quintero stepped up beside him, took the single sheet of her own orders, and read them aloud in a voice that carried clean across the water, without ever being raised. Having reported as ordered, I hereby assume command of Coast Guard Cutter Meridian. She turned to Ostrander. There was no call sign. There was no theatrical mass salute snapped on cue. There were only the honors a change of command renders by tradition, and the two oldest words in the trade. "I relieve you, sir," she said. "I stand relieved," said Ostrander, and something eased in his tired face, and he stepped back. The long glass passed. The watch was set under a new name, and Commander Marisol Quintero took the podium as the commanding officer of the Cutter Meridian. Her first look out from behind it found, in order, the people who mattered. Mauk, at the head of the formation, a single small nod passed between them, the whole of Thursday to Saturday folded into it. Halvorsen, at her colors post, standing like she'd grow into the deck. Diane Petro in the second row, weeping now, and unashamed. And last of all, at the edge of the official party where he had to stand, and could not leave, Lieutenant Garrett Pace, who could not lift his eyes from the concrete. The woman a lieutenant had waved off the pier 3 days before was standing at the podium with the ship's orders in her hand. And the only person on the entire pier who still could not look up was the man who had put her at the back. There was no arrest. There was no court-martial, no investigating officer, no charge sheet. That is not how this one ends, and the people who came for that ending will have to sit with a harder, quieter thing instead. After the guests had gone and the chairs were struck, and the cutter had her pier to herself again, Lieutenant Pace reported to the commanding officer's cabin as ordered. He stood at attention just inside the door, braced for the end of everything he had built, and he had earned the right to expect it. Commander Quintero did not raise her voice. She has, the crew would learn over the coming year, exactly 1 volume, and it is the volume of a person who has already been through the loudest night of her life and has nothing left to prove with noise. "Sit down, Lieutenant." He sat. "You ran a flawless morning," she said. "On time, on sequence. The flags were right, and the band was right, and the side boys were right, and not one guest waited in the sun longer than they had to. That is not nothing. I want you to hear that I saw it." "Ma'am, I'm not finished." She let it settle. "You ran a flawless morning, and you never once looked at the people standing in it. You saw a chart. You saw a manifest and a precedence list and a timeline, and you defended them, and they were good charts. But a chart is not the deck, Lieutenant. The deck is the people on it. I need officers who can see the deck. You're going to learn the difference. On my ship, where I can teach you, not on somebody else's, where it would have cost you a career and taught you nothing." Pace's voice came out wrecked. "Ma'am, there's no excuse. I had you walked off your own pier. By security. In front of—" "You did," she said. "And you're still here. That is the lesson. If I relieved you this afternoon, you'd spend the rest of your life telling it as a story about an unfair captain, and you'd never once look at the part that was yours. So you're going to stay, and you're going to look at it every single day, and you are going to become the kind of officer who would have caught who I was on Thursday morning by reading the way I walk down a pier." She let that land. "Now go and find Master Chief Mauk and thank him. He's the reason you still have a wardroom to embarrass yourself in. He could have stopped you a dozen times this week, and he let you choose, because he wanted to see if you'd choose right. You didn't. He's still standing behind you. Don't waste that." That was the reckoning, and it was heavier than any court could have made it. Pace was not relieved. He stayed, a division officer serving directly under the captain who had watched him fail every day for the rest of the tour. And she gave him a real job, a demanding one. She put him in charge of every deck safety gap she had spotted in 3 silent days. The springs, and the brow rigging, and the awning frames, and the things that come down on people when no one is watching. He would learn to watch. She would make sure of it. Then she went and found the others. She found Halverson on the mess deck and told her she'd had the colors count exactly right at rehearsal, and to trust herself next time and say it out loud. She found the young security petty officer and told him, in front of his chief, that he had checked credentials precisely the way he was supposed to, and that she'd noted it in writing, and that following a lawful order to walk a stranger to her seat was not a thing he would ever owe anyone an apology for. And she found Diane Petro before the old woman's ride came, and she walked her down the brow herself. Slow. Step where I step, you're fine. And she did not correct the thing Petrou had called her, because some gifts you let people keep. If you have ever been the quiet one at the back of the room, waved off and written off and told to find a seat and stay in it, and you stood up anyway when it was finally time, and let the truth speak for itself instead of shouting it, then you already understand this channel. Subscribe to Honor Tales. The patient ones, it turns out, are the ones worth waiting for. At dusk, the pier emptied, and the cutter Meridian belonged to her watch. Commander Marisol Quintero went below, down to the mess deck, where among the ship's plates and the framed photographs of a long, white life at sea, there hung a small brass plaque she had asked Mock about that afternoon. A memorial to a chief lost overboard 2 commands ago, a name the crew passed 1,000 times a day and rarely read. She stood in front of it for a while, and in her own mind, where no one could see, she said another name beside it. Dexter Otero, 23. The best deck seaman she ever had. She rested 2 fingers against the cool brass. Some names you carry onto every deck you ever command. She set hers down on the brass, where the crew would pass it 1,000 times and never know. And that was right, because the carrying was hers, and the ship's job was only to keep going. Then she climbed up through the ship she now commanded, past the watchstanders learning the shape of their new captain, and out onto the bridge wing as the last of the light went out of the sky. The watch was changing. The first watch under her command was being set, her name in the log now. The ship hers, in fact, and not only in ceremony. On the message board, a tasking had come up while the band was still playing. A real one, the actual work of the ship, a patrol to be planned, and a sea to be gone out onto. She read it in the dying light. She nodded once. There was no phone in her hand. There was no coded greeting from a presumed dead voice, no foreign port waiting in the dark, no next mission whispered across the water. There was only a captain, and her ship, and the next thing that needed doing. She folded the tasking, put it in her pocket, and went to do it. The colors came down at sunset over a cutter that had a new captain, the woman who had been waved off her own pier, who had read the ship in 90 seconds 3 days before anyone knew her name, who had paid for the Podium on a night in the Gulf and never once mentioned the bill. The ship was hers. The watch was set, and she turned away from the rail toward the only thing that had ever really mattered to her, which was the work, and went to it. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.